Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming out to the Everything NC Author Series event. We hope that you can attend our next event with Dr. Leah Williams, author of We Who Believe in Freedom, The Life and Times of Ella Baker, on November 16th at 11 a.m. It is such an honor to have Sheila Amir, author of The Bulls of Durham, and Joshua Gunn as the moderator. We're excited that Sheila was able to bring the Bull City to Raleigh for this final Bulls of Durham event. Sheila Amir is a former nutritionist turned writer, originally from Wyoming, who moved to Durham based on nothing else but love for the city. Sheila used her skills as a seasoned writer and content strategist to create Welcome to the Bull City and the Bulls of Durham. Joshua Gunn is a Durham native and award-winning artist, business owner, festival founder, and community advocate, and de facto global ambassador for the Bull City. Gunn is also a fourth-generation Durhamite and Bulls of Durham interviewee who has gone above and beyond to help this project be successful. Let's get this conversation started with Joshua Gunn and Sheila.
Thank you. How's everybody doing? Good. Really excited to be here with you, Sheila.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for asking me to moderate this very important discussion. It was really cool to be interviewed in the book. I think I was one of the early interviews,
You were on
right?
the exact one-year anniversary by chance.
Okay.
And by chance is like the unofficial slogan of this project, but we'll
Nice.
discuss that.
Nice. Well, it was really interesting, as a fourth-generation Durhamite, as I often say. My family's been here so long and has such a deep connection to the city. It was interesting to have someone who was new decide to write a book about our beloved hometown. I think the perspective you brought was very objective, right? It's one thing to be from a place and in a place, and you develop sort of a perspective from the inside. But I think the objectivity that you brought to it as sort of a newcomer, you were able to really see the city in a way that's difficult for us to see, when we've been here so long. So would love to hear, why did you decide to write this book?
First and foremost, the idea wouldn't leave me alone. And so the environment I'm from is incredibly xenophobic. Like, if you wanted to go to Wyoming and write a book about oil rigs, I'm trying to think about what there is there that symbolizes the state. We've got oil rigs. People, why are you here? Who are you with? Who's paying you? Who are you related to? And then it just wouldn't happen. They label individuals as outsiders, so it just wouldn't happen. So I'm thinking, no, everybody's going to say no. There's no way I'm going to get an interview. Yeah, 126 later. I also thought I could get the project done in a year, but the idea just wouldn't leave me alone. It was literally like waking me up, and when I first moved to Durham, I was just love drunk is how I would describe it. I just walk around the city. Sometimes there was actual alcohol involved, but I would just walk around the city taking it in, and I'm like, what is up with this bull thing?
Yeah.
It's everywhere. These people are a little obsessed. So the original concept was find the bull, find the story behind the bull, and I was just trying to get the idea to leave me alone. And I was sitting at Pompieri Pizza, and you can see down the alley, there was a Bull City Brewery sign.
Yep.
There was no wind. I can clarify that there was no wind because I'm from the third windiest place on earth. So
Okay.
I just want to clarify, I know wind. And there was no wind, and that sign wiggled at me. Now, full disclosure, I'd had 2 glasses of wine, and they put it in mason jars and fill it up to the big girl line.
That's right.
So there might not have been an actual wiggle, but I feel like there was a wiggle, and I felt like that was the muse saying, go do it. So I was like, I'll try. I'm going to get shut down. I truly believed I was going to get shut down. I did not know that exact day was 919 days exactly to Durham's exact 150th anniversary. But I went home and started an Instagram account, and because it would be inappropriate to write a city's history and keep it for myself.
Right.
The whole point was to write the book with Durham, and I did. So.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. I am not surprised that you were able to get interviews, not only because you're really talented and really engaging, but also because Durham folks really love to talk about Durham.
Durham loves to love Durham, and I literally have the receipts on that. When you sell 4,600 mugs that say someone in Durham loves me,
Yeah.
we have them in 5 out of 7 continents. So
Yeah. We love our city.
yeah, but it's not narcissism. It's something else.
I think Durham develops a really interesting attachment. Durhamites develop a really interesting attachment to the city, partially because it's an amazing place and there's so many cool things happening, but also partially because of sort of some negative perceptions of Durham from the outside. So you develop this chip on your shoulder that really manifests itself in a really strong pride in the city, which I'm sure you experienced through writing the book.
I've saw it come out in interviewees, and it's funny when it comes out of my mouth, because I still don't, despite having the name tattooed on my body, despite having the best-selling book about Durham ever, all of that, like, I wasn't born in Durham, so there's still a little this, what do they call that, imposter syndrome, but there's been a couple times I'm like, excuse me, don't make me go Durham on you. And I'm like, oh, I can't say that, that's inappropriate. So there's definitely that pride, and what's really interesting, Ren Bowman, who started the Visitors Bureau, which is now Discover Durham, when he did the initial testing before it was even an entity, he had done a Visitors Bureau in Anchorage, Alaska, and so he knew how to do the testings, and he actually likes statistics. I told him I still liked him, but statistics is his favorite thing. There's a type of test that assesses city pride, and so a city that's really proud of itself on the scale of 0 to 100 would be like a 30. So he does all the cities in the triangle. And Wake Forest, it was like a 10. Raleigh was like a 15. I'll keep it nice, Raleigh, I promise. So all the areas, that's a scale of like, we don't actually like where we live. And being from somewhere where I didn't like where I lived, I was like, oh, I get that. You're like Letterbuck, but you still on the down low, you're like, yeah, the city's not for me. Durham's continuously, from this first test forward, has scaled an 80 to 90, which wasn't even something they thought was statistically possible. And that's even, so it was 1989 when he put that, and we were having economic struggles, we were having crime issues, misreported crime issues, but there were crime issues there as well. And Durham was still like, we're amazing, what's wrong? So, I mean, that's like above and beyond proud of your city.
We are raised with that love affair for the city, for sure. How do you think being a newcomer to Durham impacted your overall experience with the book, as well as how the book turned out?
So, I'm like, I'm not going to get an interview. I was so grateful for every interview, but I didn't know who to reach out to. So if they had Bull in the name is where I started. And I think leading with gratitude, things always end well. But I also didn't have the bias of, I'm not going to interview this person because they sassed off to my cousin 15 years ago. There just wasn't that backstory to it. It was every individual. I was seeing Durham through the beginner's eyes. And it was every single interview. The whole point of the book is the multiple perspectives, because there's truly not one Durham. I mean, we know the tale of continuing 2 Durhams, but, and in that way, there wasn't a bias of who to interview and who not to interview.
Yeah, I guess you're right. You didn't come with any local baggage, right? You're completely an objective observer of the city, and that makes sense. That when I met you, I was like, yeah, I don't know who this person is, but happy to share my story and Durham's story.
Sat down with me in public. I mean, that could have gone west.
No, it was really a really cool process. Tell us a little bit about making the book happen, because I have watched you fight and stand strong for this book to exist, right? I know it hasn't been easy, but how'd you pay for this thing? How'd you make all this happen?
Yeah, well, I have literally hustled mugs out of the back of my Prius in an alley, and if that's not Durham, I don't know what is. That's not like a story I'm making up, and it's been more than one back alley, some dark parking garages. Like, I will sell you a mug. I am about that mug life. So I started this project with 0 connections in Durham, other than my barber, who's not an interviewee, but David keeps it on point. 0 connections and $0, nothing. And it was just, what do I need to get it done? So we've had this conversation of funding the dream, right?
Yeah.
So we have the job so we can do the things that we love to do. So
That's
I
right.
kept my full-time job. I'm a self-employed writer. We have sold, last I counted, it was 4,600 Bull Love mugs, and I got $19,000 in funding from Capital Broadcasting, Duke Office for Durham and Regional Affairs, and the Durham 150 committee, and the rest of that was me.
Wow.
It ended up, I made the bad joke, so the universe is like, you got jokes, I got jokes. And I made the bad joke that this is probably going to end up costing like $50,000, and the universe is like, no, 102.
Wow. Well, congrats to you on pulling that off. That, I mean, $102,000 would have scared quite a few people away from completing this project.
I'm still scared, but it's done. Like, do it scared, right?
That's right. Be scared and do it anyway. I think watching your resolve and your endless consistency or persistence to make this happen was really impressive.
Thank you.
There were many times that we talked and you were like, I don't know if this is going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to make this. I don't know. I'm not going to get this round of funding. I have 50,000 words to transcribe before tomorrow or something like that. And you with the help of a few folks, you really did a lot of this work on your own. So
I think if Durham hadn't helped me, because there's a lot of things, there's what I call Durham currency.
Yeah.
And if you're a good person in Durham, you can get real far
That's right.
on who you are. Like my Durham currency is pretty high. I genuinely think this would have cost close to $300,000. There was, a lot that was given to me, a lot that was services and people showing up and discounts. You're like, when's the rest of this bill coming? So
Yeah.
people just stepped in where things ought to cost money, and they don't. And the funny thing is that was like an echoing of the interviews. I was like, wow, that must have been really nice to have somebody knock out that wall for you at Cocoa Cinnamon, and then
Yeah.
people just show up in Durham. If you show up for Durham, Durham will show up for you.
Yeah, I love that about our community, right? If you have a good idea and you prove that you're willing to work for it, a lot of folks in Durham will say, okay, cool, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something as our city grows, I hope that we can maintain is that real sense of community and that desire to see Durhamites succeed. But so you started the book because you moved to Durham, you thought it was an interesting place, the Bulls intrigued you.
Mm-hmm.
But how has your perception of Durham evolved since writing this whole historical, living history of our city? How do you feel about Durham now?
This is not going to be surprising, but I love Durham even more.
Right.
Like I call Durham the love of my life. The way I explain it is the first 33 years of my life, so this book was written in a day. The first 33 years of my life were like when the TVs had that static noise when they would go out in the 80s, which is great for sensory disorder, but that was the first 33 years of my life, and I physically touched Durham, and that stopped. And even though Durham has tried me a time or two, which I think that's like an initiation thing, it's just every day I find a new reason to love our city, and then when you're digging in the history, you're like, wow. Like we set the tone on so many things that people have to be creative to constructively try to hold Durham down, and I love that about our city.
So you talk about digging in the history.
I went deep.
You did. You did go deep.
1701.
Well, tell us about some of the most interesting historical finds that you uncovered that maybe many of us might not be familiar with.
Awesome. I think the biggest takeaway that I have, and I really want to share this with our young bulls in the community, is, and everyone as well, but Durham would not exist at all without African Americans, period.
Yeah.
And that's been proven time and time, but like literally, there's figuratively and there's literally, let's all use those correctly. So the first myth, this book is the first book to dispel a very long-standing myth that was actually mispublished just as recently as 5 years ago. The Stephen Slade myth. There's signage throughout North Carolina about this. No, he did not live in Durham, but bright leaf tobacco made Durham, period, end of story.
Right.
And so the myth was that this gentleman, an enslaved gentleman, was lazy because he couldn't stay awake for 24 hours. So during the day, he was a blacksmith on this plantation, and in the evening, he was supposed to be watching the flu curing process of tobacco. He fell asleep because, air quotes, lazy, And so he wakes up and the fire had almost gone out, so he ran to where his blacksmithing location. I know nothing about blacksmithing. So history, yes, blacksmithing, no. And grabbed some charcoal to get the fire going again, and it raised the temperature so quickly that the leaves magically turned yellow and sweet, and that's how bright leaf tobacco was created. So they had to construct this myth. Stephen Slade was a real person. They had to construct this myth because we do have to give credit where credit is due. We can't, there was just no way around saying
including him in the story.
Right. Well, we couldn't, and we had to it's easier to give credit when you're racist to one person than to the actual group of individuals responsible. When you're stealing culture, it's a little bit easy to say we stole it from one.
Right.
Then we stole it all together.
Right.
And the truth behind that is it's not just the curing process. You've got to plant the right seeds, like physically be able to, like on site, look at the seeds, and these are the right ones, in the right soil at the right time of year. And then you've got to harvest it at the exact right time, dry it, to the point where, and everybody's got a mama in this room. This will make sense to everybody. Bright leaf tobacco, in order to get the right final product, the leaves have to be picked at the exact color of green, yellow. We all know that was somebody's mama, right? Like we can all see, we are all that little child and you're going to go pick that leaf and she's like, what did I tell you? Like that's a very distinct, you just know that was somebody's mom.
Right.
And so it took the knowledge of hundreds of enslaved individuals over time to create it. So it is the intelligence and hard work of the enslaved individuals that created bright leaf tobacco, the very sweet, highly addictive. It's very handy when you're selling products if they're addictive, by the way. The product that, just happened to be stolen while we're trying to figure out the last Civil War surrender that made Durham the spot to get the best tobacco on earth. Smoking is bad, kids, though. I just wanted to end that. Smoking's bad.
Yeah, I find it interesting that a city built on tobacco that caused so many illnesses is now a center for medical research, right? It almost seems like a natural progression, right, from creating disease to creating cures.
One of my favorite things is on American Tobacco Campus, on the ATC signs, it says no smoking on American Tobacco Campus.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite little details in Durham. That's yeah.
I'll one-up you at the Chesterfield building, the old Liggett and Myers building. There's a big plaque that says dedicated to the millions and millions who smoke Chesterfield Kings. And literally adjacent to it is a big sticker that says no smoking in this building at all.
I'm going to go get a photo next to that.
Yes.
I haven't seen it since that sticker went up.
Yeah, Durham has a lot of those interesting contradictions, right? Or dichotomies, I suppose. I'm going to ask you a question that I'm going off the book here on one thing.
I knew it was going to happen.
I think it's worth, this book's called The Bulls of Durham, and most of us know that the Bull City became famous because of Bull Durham tobacco, but let's talk about how it even became the mascot for the tobacco company. Tell us about the Bull and Durham and how we got that moniker.
I just heard the most messed up version of the story this week, so thank you for letting me clarify this. We stole it. We didn't borrow it. It's not an emulation. It's not flattery. We done stole it. So there was a gentleman, John Green, so I kind of want to live on Green Street, but it's in the Trinity area.
Yeah.
I ain't got that money. I ain't that fancy. But a gentleman named John Green stole it off of Coleman Mustard. Coleman Mustard hates me personally, so I'm banned from their Instagram page. So
Why is that?
I shared history. I thought it was funny we stole their bull, but they're they do have a really high sodium content, so they're literally salty about something we did 150 years ago. So so he steals this bull logo because it looks really good, but what he didn't know is that bull, by chance, is a type of cattle called Durham cattle, and its scientific name is Boss Durham.
Boss Durham.
So, and they're considered I don't think they use the terminology in the 1800s, but now they're called the Cadillac of cattle kind of thing. As someone who grew up in a state where we're outnumbered 3-1 by cattle, I'm like, who calls them the Cadillac? But anyways, because they're sturdy and they actually look, if you look at old tobacco labels, old Bull Durham, it's like this boxy, they actually look like that. They look like a square with legs on them, but by chance, he stole it off of Coleman Mustard. It was Boss Durham, and that's how it became the Bull City. And he had a business partner who goes missing from history as soon as Blackwell became business partners with him. And then Green, like literally within 6 months after becoming business partners with Blackwell, died.
Wow.
Most likely due to tuberculosis. Was like in some news report years later. Like there was no cause of death.
Wow.
Blackwell wasn't messing around.
You should write it. You should make this into a documentary. These are some fascinating
Here's
stories.
Here's the idea. We either get Joaquin Phoenix or Daniel Day-Lewis, because they're both good with that stern, crazed character,
Yes.
to be Blackwell. And then the
Okay.
most losery person possible to be Carr. I have thoughts on Carr.
Should we talk about Blackwell? Why do you say we need someone stern and sinister?
He was crazy.
Okay. What do we
yes.
need what do we need to know about W.T. Blackwell? What do we need to know? Is it W.T.?
W.T.
Yeah.
William T. I'm going to start going by S and Amir. Keep it cool. I'm my only friend without a stage name. Like there's Law, Gunn, G, and I'm over here like Sheila.
Well, my stage name is my real name. So is G. G's stage name is his real name. So
G
you can
for
just be Sheila
George.
Amir. You don't need
Yeah.
a stage name
Maybe
anymore.
is she my stage name?
No.
No. W.T. Blackwell, so there's Blackwell Street, that's where the old Bull building is. He was like, I think today we would term him, it was above and beyond workaholic. He was crazed, had horrible insomnia. He was not sweet and loving, but he was hell-bent on his company being the best company. The amount of money he spent to sue over anybody using a bull is ridiculous. It would be in the millions of dollars today. He literally would walk the streets of Durham, New York, wherever he was, and look in the middle of the night instead of sleeping, and look at the tobacco litter on the ground. And if there were more other brands than Bull Durham being littered on the ground, in his mind that meant that there were more consumers smoking the wrong brand.
Right.
Then everybody had to go to work the next day and make sure that that didn't happen. And
Wow.
he took our branding so far that there were actual Bull Durham ads in China, and then also the Bull Durham paintings. Do we want to get into the low riding fence?
Let's talk about the paintings for a second.
So, has anyone in here seen on the old historic paintings on the side of brick buildings? Those are dog wall paintings. I don't know why they're called dog wall paintings, but the painters were called dog wall painters. And then they often get referred to as ghost paintings because all that stays is the white. And he invented branding as far as I'm concerned. Like Durham is mentioned in a lot of marketing textbooks because we get branding.
Yeah.
We will brand anything and sell it. So, so he wanted the art to be congruent. So he paid there were only 4 ever Bull Durham artists throughout the U.S. And this gentleman from Winston-Salem, I believe, Reuben Rink was his top artist. And his shtick was he would go into towns to go paint this bull, and he would paint them anatomically correct, and sometimes a little exaggerated. They were Boss Durham, you know. So. And then he would write a letter at the newspaper as a concerned citizen, and say that it was very lewd that this bull's genitals were on display. And he was very concerned, and create this total frenzy. You know, then everybody's looking at this ad and that this bull is male. And then he would get paid by that city to put a low riding fence in front of it. So he got paid twice. He got paid by Blackwell, and then he would get paid by the city because he was helping them out. Who would do such a thing? So that's what, and then sometimes he'd get a little ballsy and leave a little bit of to be seen underneath the fence. So every time I see one of those ads, it's just nonstop giggle.
It's pretty genius, though. I mean, he created created his own controversy, so that helps the brand. So Blackwell was happy, but then he also got paid twice to go repair the damages. That's really
Genius.
cool. So, not to spend too much time on tobacco, but it's obviously the reason why Durham became what it is in many ways. So W.T. Blackwell starts W.T. Blackwell and Sons Tobacco, right?
And the brand was Bull Durham.
And Bull Durham was the
And then
was the
finally,
product.
Bull Durham became such a thing that it encapsulated that they just rolled. Kind of like the Bulls of Durham became such a thing. I'm like, this is my job.
Yeah, right. So, how did the Duke family sort of come into play with Bull Durham and Blackwell, and we can't talk about Durham without talking about Duke, unfortunately, because I'm a
The original
Tar
one was-
Heel fan, I must say.
I know. That's the question I thought you were going to ask, and I'm like, I'm not answering on stage. I have not been here long enough that I have to answer that which blue question. I'm gonna
Well, when I was growing up at 5 years old, that's the second thing they ask you in kindergarten is what's your name and what's your favorite team. So you have to pick really early. And I'm a proud Durhamite, but also a proud Tar Heel fan. So anyway, so let's talk about Duke.
I'm not answering that question on stage.
So how did the Duke family become so prominent in Durham?
The same way that Bull Durham did, actually. So the largest Civil War surrender, by chance, was in Durham, and they picked a place called Bennett Place because it was convenient. I don't think the Bennett family thought that was convenient, but the soldiers did. So it took 11 days. You have young men who are sick of fighting, left unattended for 11 days. You've got soldiers on both sides. What do young men do when they're left unattended? And they got money in their pockets and time. So they ransacked all the tobacco factories. I mean, so Greene comes back and Washington Duke comes back, and they have literally nothing but empty, torn up buildings. All their tobacco's gone. They think they're ruined. And we actually started getting a flood of orders for bright leaf tobacco. I mean, couldn't even come up with, like, where are we going to grow all this, kind of thing. Could not keep up with it because we had the best tasting, most addictive tobacco in the world.
Right.
So smoking's bad, though.
They stole it the first time.
And then they got addicted.
And then they got addicted, and they're like, I got to have more.
And so all those orders came in. They
Right.
had their factories set up. So I always say that, like, the post-Civil War economic impact in Durham only lasted as long as a pack of smokes, because as soon as they were out, they tried smoking something else, and they're like, nah, I need that Durham tobacco. So Duke already he was what was considered upper middle class. He had a 4-bedroom house.
Nice.
I actually got a history lesson on that back patio, no big deal. And so he was, set to go, and he started his own tobacco thing, and it was Duke and Sons. A gentleman named Watts bought into that, and then it became Duke and Sons and Company. Originally, their tobacco company was called Pro Bono Publico, which means for the public good, tobacco.
Interesting.
So the actual, like, my sponsors, the thank you in here is Pro Bono Publico on there, and like the one history joke that I'm gonna get and Duke Homestead's gonna get in there. And so because he was, I think that's kind of the story of how certain individuals prosper more than others, because he already had the resources in place.
That's right.
He had the connections in place. He was able to grow this empire to the extent that, there's now the Duke Endowment that has more money than the state of North Carolina. I mean, so there would be no Durham, and, it's interesting to think, where would North Carolina be if it wasn't for tobacco? So you can't really, go around it, but he was Blackwell's #1 competition for a very, very long time. A long time, so.
So did the Duke family not acquire American Tobacco, or Blackwell's, Bull Durham Tobacco?
They came together at one point, but it was shortly before they broke up the monopoly.
Okay.
Like, it's like a really short period of history and time that they owned, there was 5 total large tobacco companies, and they all came together, and then the government was like,
Nah.
Durham is out of control, because that monopoly law that is created, if you look at it, was like Durham specific. We tend to get in trouble, and then everybody else has to follow those rules that are created as a result. Durham has a lot of incidences of that.
No doubt. That sounds very Durham to me.
Yeah.
So, in addition to covering the history of Durham, the sort of stuff from the books, folks that are no longer living, you were able to do over 120 interviews with living Durhamites. How did you pull that off? How did you get 120 plus people to sit down and give you their life story, and then take that and turn it into 2 books?
Yeah, so we covered from 1701 to February 2019, interviewed over 120 individuals. I think it was 126, but at some point you're just out of fingers to count, keep counting. I started by just asking, and I was like, the worst they can say is no. I've been told worse in this life. And I, by chance, asked Ann Neiman, who owns Bull and Bean. I saw a bull in the name. Her husband is Tom Neiman, who did the West Village Apartments with 2 Duke basketball players, which ended up being a huge controversy.
Yeah.
He stopped taking interviews because of that.
Ah.
The reason I got to interview Tom Neiman, and this is how Durham works, take notes, is because I had interviewed his wife, and his wife told him to. I got
That's
a
how the world
lot
works.
of interviews. In fact, Michael Palmer, the first thing he ever said to me before even sitting down or shaking my hand was, "I'm Michael Palmer. I'm here because Desiree said to be." And Dr. Desiree Palmer is his wife. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, and I had already been told he's either going to like you or not. I was like, oh, well, I think I'm in the not category. Joke, he's a mentor. But that was what he said to me. But the second interview was Bull City Dental.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked it again because it was a bull in the name. And they actually, here's another sign wiggle. When I came to visit Durham that one time, and then a month later moved here, I had noticed their sign. They have a really beautiful, well-done metal bull sign out front. I just happened to notice it. The day that I was visiting for the first time was the day that sign went up.
Yeah.
But they were on my interview list because I remembered that sign. And I ended every interview with, who do you think would be a good contribution to this book? To let Durham write. That was like one of the practices I had, to let Durham write the book. And Dr. Palmer, I asked her, I was like, who do you think would be a good contribution for this book? And she's like, oh, call my friend Bill. And I'm like, oh, I'll call your friend Bill, whatever. It's like, who's Bill? What does he do? And she just looks at me like I'm a total fool. And she's like, he's the mayor, Bill Bell. And then I was like, oh, I'll just call your friend the mayor.
Right.
And I did, and I had actually been in Durham for a year and 8 days, and I was sitting in front of, I don't even know if Wyoming has enough people to have a mayor, like, of the state, let alone a city. Like, we got more horses than people, and here I'm like, a mayor. This is, and
Yeah.
now, I'm the person who yelled, yo, Bill, at him, and I'll never live that down. It's like, hey, yeah, so I got to interview him, and so every interview led to the next one kind of after that. I
Yeah.
got to sit with some real legends, and I'm just, I got to sit with Phil Freelon. I got to sit with Dr. Phalewin Jr.
Yeah. Rest in peace to both of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both of them. So it just a huge blessing, but a barber introduced me to you or gave me your phone number, and you said yes, and I was like, well, here, we'll see how this is. So, and you met up with me in public. And didn't go wrong, so.
And it was a cool interview.
Mm-hmm.
I rambled on and on. I was really nervous to see how it ended up in the book, but it turned out okay.
It turned out fine. And just to clarify, since we're being taped on here, I did and you'll see his book in the little quote, and I have told your wife several times, I ran that by you twice.
You
before-
did. You
okay.
did, yes. I stand by my quote in that small book.
You yelled that in the Durham lobby.
So how let's talk about the small book. So when you started this, the plan was to create a living history book
One
for
book.
Durham. And now we have 2 books. How did we end up with two very different versions of the Bulls of Durham?
A writer's gonna write. So I was at the tail end of this project, last 8 months or so, and I'm looking at how much money I'm gonna need. And it was a nasty number, which got bigger. It was rude, right? So it's like $28,000 or something like that. Had to be raised in just a couple months. And I was like, the weird thing is I'm not rich, but I kept getting these bills. I make big bills, I need to make big money. And I had all these quotes that weren't fitting in the big book. And I'm a little attached to this project.
Yeah,
I was like, I
a
love
little
little bit. And I didn't want to I just couldn't lose them. And they were beautiful answers. So every interviewee answered the same 6 base questions. And this question, which every Durhamite is still answering to me, I'm still in interview mode, is what's the first thing you want people to know about the Bull City? So if someone's coming to visit you who's never been to Durham before, what's the first thing you want them to know? And the answers were all very different, but they
Yeah.
all had the same core message of welcome to Durham, but that was a movie that we don't really want to give a highlight to. So really quick, fast became Welcome to the Bull.
Some of my homeboys
City.
made that movie, by the way. I'm really good friends with the people who made that movie.
Such a controversy.
It is very controversial.
You say welcome to the Bull City.
It was a realistic depiction of some of Durham during that time period, though. So I think it should be in the historical record for sure.
It's definitely accurate, but it was also a sore point for a lot of people.
was, yeah.
And so part of Durham's got some politics that you've got to do-si-do around, and somehow, like, I made it through this project without any enemies, so.
That's even more impressive. That is.
I mean, there's some people on my list, but they don't. I'm not necessarily on their list.
Right.
So I think keeping it open and not like salting any wounds, and just leading with love and gratitude. So the little book became a fundraiser, and it's also the best-selling book in Durham, and it's the best-selling book about Durham.
Wow.
And it just goes into the black hole of finance.
Can we give it up for that? That deserves a round of applause. That's pretty impressive. The best-selling book in Durham and the best-selling book about Durham. Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
So
congratulations.
Thank you. And we have, I think, 26 vendors, but we got that in the airport. So that was a big win. It's the unofficial welcome item. Mayor Steve, wouldn't make it the official because then I would be the ruler, and he said that wasn't nice. And I was like, I think you're just not wanting to do the paperwork, but that flattery just worked really well, Steve. Thank you.
That's cool. So I know this is about the history of Durham, right? It's a living, but you were very intentional about calling it a living history, which to me implies a continuous story, right? Continually adding to the historical record. We talked a little bit before we started today about how Durham's changed. Can we talk about both what you uncovered in your interviews in regards to how people feel about that change, and also what you think we need to, what are the key issues with the way that our city is changing?
I'm going to make it through this without tearing up. So apparently this book is the most in-depth sociological research ever done on Durham. And so when you walk around with that knowledge and you see certain things, it hits on a different level. So I was able to, the first historical document, which I think we need to be clear that history, like the term itself, it means specifically when people of European descent started writing things down. Let's be clear. So the first historical thing that Durham was ever called was the flower of the Carolinas.
Yeah.
We've been called worse, but so that's what, I covered the indigenous people that were here first is actually what's covered in there. And all the way to February 2019, including a quote from Steve Schul, Mayor Steve, saying that we have to make a decision if this is a Durham for all or if this is a Durham for rich white millennials. Our mayor is very clear about, you never wonder what Steve's thinking.
Right.
He's that dude. I like him. So, and that's really where we're at. So if you look at Durham's historical patterns, it's not that racism was not in Durham.
Yeah.
It's still here, Islamophobia and racism are alive and well in the United States, and I even got some of that during the project as well. But it's that it didn't hold the same value as money. And so Durham has always had, entrepreneurship is Durham.
Right.
And that's what always led the way, like, we don't have time to be racist, we got money to make. And that's why Washington Duke openly funded, was one of the initial funders for Black Wall Street. He openly he was friends with the founders of Durham's Black Wall Street
John
community.
Merrick and he were really good friends. Yeah.
And actually the highest level of giving, so each level of giving, donating to the Duke office in Durham Regional Affairs is a very important community relationship. They're all named after that. And the highest level of giving is the Merrick Washington Duke level.
Yeah.
And he openly took meetings with, like, specifically in public places to say, this is how white business works, because that's who, business was at that time. And that's why we had the, most successful Black Wall Street, successful as in nobody touched our Black Wall Street. If you look at the other Black Wall Streets throughout the United States, highway through it, urban renewal development, or it was burned down. But a good portion, our Hayti community was paved over with the 147, but Parish Street, untouchable. And the reason for that was the mutual level of respect between the communities. So Durham's been pretty close to being 50-50 black and white. And, on some censuses, there's more black, a little bit more white, but we're talking like within 1 or 2 percentage points. And then us other started, creeping in. The 15% other, now 17% other. We have a very strong Latinx community that's, creating a very large population. And so those percentages then are like 40%, but then you've got the other 20% other. And unfortunately, the next census projection for Durham, and it's just something like when you research this history, you meet the people, you read, you just get so into this that when you read that the next projection is that we're going to be closer to 52% white, 38% black, it's going to be more of that breakdown. That's almost like a gut punch, because then the factors that are contributing to it. That ATC and that the downtown Durham area is the most expensive real estate in North Carolina, which increases property taxes. And when you see we'll buy houses for cash for houses signs, handwritten, Persians don't cry. Anyways, you see those, it's somebody's grandma who owns that house getting pushed out by those property taxes in a place that people didn't want to go, and now we're throwing axes drunk on beer, which I know you did. There was a little bit of judgment.
I did throw some axes, yes I did.
I just don't think that's a safe activity, but I come from...
I wasn't drunk on beer, but I did throw the axes.
But that's what the establishment is for.
This is true.
And so my concern point with that, not, go make your money, go have your fun activities and all of that,
Right.
but you get people riled up and drunk, and I'm preface this with I'm in place when people get drunk and go shoot guns in the air, population control, or play with rattlesnakes. Anyways, you get them doing some kind of like a masculine, testosterone, violent activity. You step right outside there, and there's somebody who hasn't had a home in years,
Yeah.
who doesn't look like you, and now this is what mood you're in, and this is what mood there's in, and there's two different. You're being pitted against one another situationally.
Sure.
Who's going to be projected as the bad guy in the news?
Right.
And that's my concern of where we're going, is that these changes are happening so rapidly that it's against everything that's been Durham's story up to like 8 years ago. So reinventing ourselves, that's Durham.
Right.
Like, we got no problem doing that. We'll give you lung cancer and then we'll cure it.
That's
Like,
right.
if we can handle that, we got anything. But then the next step of the most important thing that we have to do at this time, like, we have to sit down and say, what is Durham? Get a definition of that, and then do everything we can to hold on to that, because the change is happening so fast that real Durham is getting lost. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but almost like the fish bowling effect, where we're on display for the newcomers because it's becoming almost like this little amusement park or something. It's a very weird feeling, but like, I'll be doing something, just living my best life in Durham, whatever, and then hearing people say, well, only in Durham would you see that. I'm not even that weird. I mean, you want to see real Durham, I'll take you over in that neighborhood, but I don't know if that's the place you ought to be. So it's just hard to say, like, there's no historical comparison for what we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. I think in listening to this story, the way you've told it today, I think there's a few things that stand out for me. One is that it was industry that brought the people here, right? So in particular, it was tobacco that brought people here. People created culture here in this version of history, right? Post the indigenous populations who were displaced. What seems interesting about this current growth is there's really no clear industry to point to that's driving the growth. What would you say you uncovered in your book about the growth in general and what's driving it?
The growth that's coming in now is there's money coming in for tech, a lot of it, and tech and medical have almost become synonymous at this juncture. We've got pharmacy, we've got Duke Medical, we've got UNC Medical, we've got the subsidiaries that support that. We are the tech hub of the South, who strangely has internet go out all the time. Try using the internet on 9th Street and down at the end of University Drive. You just try it. And so we have tech is money, coming in, and you have kids coming out of college. I'm not old enough to be calling them kids, but we're going to go with it. I'm a little old lady. And they're getting their dream job. I mean, can you imagine stepping out of college and there's this place that's in all the articles is one of the top 25 places to live. Sometimes they call it Raleigh, Durham. They are two very distinctly different places.
No such thing as Raleigh, Durham.
No such thing.
No.
Anyone that says that, you're just like, I got trust issues with you right here, right now. We cannot repair this relationship.
That's always one of the most. So I frequently people visit for various reasons. Visit me in Durham, or I get to tour people around the city. And one of the biggest surprises for folks who've never been here is how far Raleigh and Durham are actually from one another. Because like Minneapolis, St. Paul, for instance, are very close. Like you can see St. Paul from parts of Minneapolis. But Raleigh and Durham are pretty far apart.
You have
from
time
one
to
another.
think, you know, like think about what you just saw.
And there's also like this, driving from Raleigh to Durham, there's this long gap of sort of suburban or nothingness, right? It's just like trees and houses. So it doesn't feel like a contiguous urban area in the way other hyphenated regions are. So I think I try to emphasize to people that Raleigh, Durham is the airport.
That's the only socially acceptable place you can say that.
Right, and the rest of it they're two distinct cities with some other smaller areas in between.
Yeah, so I think we've created this place where there's really cool jobs, but we have the phenomenon of the missing bad guy, right? It's really easy in a narrative to say, you know, like all bad guys wear black, you know, except Johnny Cash. And it's so easy in the narrative. All good guys wear white, all bad guys wear black, and you know who is who. And the bad guy doesn't have morals, and he gives this really long story before you take him out and whatever. But in the story that Durham is having right now is you have. No one's a bad guy for getting their dream job out of college, you know? It's like high fives for you. You probably had some doors open for you. Maybe not, maybe you scrapped for it, whatever. But hey, go you got a dream job. And you're getting paid great, and you move to a city based on quality of life. Like that, go for the youngins thinking of quality of life. Not a bad guy, right? Then you have this population who's displaced, and I think we need to clarify, like people hear crime, bad guy. No one gets into a life of crime because of they just like being diabolical. Like nobody's out there with, you know, monocles and all of that, you know, just creating it.
Dr. Evil, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's not usually the gig. That's not the shtick. Leaving out orange analogies. But no one actually just goes in to do things because they're horrible. They do it because they got to eat. And so when you have this population, they're being pushed out of their houses. They're ending up, you know, homeless. And they're pushed out, you can only be told for so long you don't matter.
Sure.
And that if your words don't work, what works next? I will make you feel my pain. And that's where you start having violent crimes, when you push somebody down. So, you know, you're putting two populations at risk. Well, how did that happen? Who sold that property? Who constructed the leasing, you know, prices? Who created the leasing structure? Who's created... You know, like if you get evicted from a property, you're put on this list and you can't rent for 3 years. Where are you supposed to stay? Yeah. So we have a system, and we have, you know, I'm not going to say realtors and leasing agents are bad guys, but they got the same. We all have the same job. This is going to shock everybody in this room because we probably all have different jobs, titles, but it's bringing the most money you can home to your family.
Right.
I don't care what you do. That's your job. And so they're just doing their job. Where's the bad guy in this? Everybody went to work, you know, and if you want to say that the realtor, the leasing agent, the outside company from Georgia or you know, Golden, Colorado, who built, you know, these buildings is the bad guy. Well, they were just going to work, but they're long gone when the violent crime occurs between the pushed out and the dream jobber, you know. But who is the one reported in the news as the bad guy? The person who, you know, committed the violent crime.
We're way down
dark path.
This is a different author's talk right here. This is
real talk. So that's why I ended the book on a happy note.
Very important topic of conversation as we talk about the rich history of our city and how it influences where we go forward. What would you say was your biggest takeaway from writing this book? What was the one thing that you want us to remember? For those of us who have read the book and for those of us who haven't, what is the biggest takeaway?
That in 2019, in this present moment, or maybe 2020, but right quick, Durham has to decide who Durham is and how we're going to keep it Durham. So that's a two-step process. What is Durham? How are we going to keep it? That's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, yeah. That is a tough question to answer, right? Because depending on who you ask, right, you get very different responses to what is Durham.
So we've got to come together on this one.
We need to figure out how to get everybody on the same page. That's a great way to point it out. Well, I'm really excited about this. Can we give it up for Sheila Amir, y'all, for not only for the talk today, but for all of the 2 years worth of work?
However long 919 days is.
Yeah.
So two and a half, somewhere in there.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I know you've got some really exciting things coming up, one of which I'd love to let you share with the folks here today. What's next for the Bulls of Durham?
Yeah, so I got the official okay to say a bit about it. So talk about those Durham politics. I think I navigated them from 5 different directions this week. So an important part of this project has always been the young bulls. That's what we call kids in Durham, young bulls. It's not offensive. That's always been in my heart because it's just so dope that when you're walking down the street on Fitzgerald bricks, like we are walking on the most amazing history. Mm-hmm. There were people that, Polly Murray, Durham Saint, like literally we call her a Durham Saint. She wrote Brown versus the Board of Education as part of her college work at Howard. Yeah. So the people that came from nothing in Durham and became, Washington Duke came from nothing. Anybody that's got a big name and got a street name in Durham came from nothing. And they became their own version of success. All these interviewees, I have 126 documented cases of success by different definitions, because there's the American definition, white picket fence, 2.5 kids, the retriever, all of that. So we worked really hard. Capital Broadcasting has done the financial work and a lot of the footwork. Actually, Adam Klein has done all of the footwork.
Shout out to Adam Klein and all the stuff he's doing at Capital. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great community partner, really.
Great community partner. They wrote me a nice check without having a published book to my name. And then I pointed that out after, and they were like, wow, that was really brazen. I was like, I had some online articles, y'all, but that's pretty easy to get an article to go viral. And you're like, here's a giant check that you've never seen before. But we have, as of the end of this year, there will be a copy of the Bulls of Durham in every single Durham public school for the kids to access.
All right, let's give it up for that. That's so important for the future of our city, for people to know sort of from whence they come, right, or whatever it is, from where you came, right, and to ensure that people have that pride in our city, that 90% pride score continues. So I think we're at time. Can we give it up one more time for Sheila Amir? And thank you all for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.